and get this presentation going. Cool? Let's do this.
All right. All right. Hey, everybody. So I'm Tamar Samir, and I'm here with Markella Los. And it's really great to be here with so many inspiring organizers. And we're really grateful to Ilana for inviting us to speak at Organizing 2.0. I'm going to turn off my camera as well and come back later, but you'll hear me over the slides. So we're here to talk about the digital campaign for Unionized Yoga, which is the first ever union for yoga teachers in the United States. We'll tell you about the ways that we use social media to organize, reach allies, and win our union. And we'll suggest ways that you can use these strategies too. At the end of the presentation, we'll take your questions. So like Markella said, our presentation is short and snappy. So if you want to take a closer look at something, we'll show it to you again at the end.
Tamar,
so let's take a look.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Can I interrupt real quick? I just wanted to tell folks to double click the blue page that you see right now, and that'll enlarge it. And then if you shrink the comment section to the right with a little arrow above the right next to the time, you'll be able to see a little more clearly. Sorry about that, T.
No worries. Thank you. So this is the mission statement for Unionized Yoga. So obviously yoga teachers. As teachers, we're coming together to ensure the sustainability of our profession through fair and equitable pay, transparent and truthful communication, and a clear path for growth, job security, and benefits. When our voice is heard, we as employees will thrive, the students will thrive, and the company will thrive. We are stronger united.
So, hey everybody, I'm Markella Los. I'm one of the founding organizers for Unionized Yoga and for the movement to organize yoga and fitness teachers here in New York City. I use the social media and communication skills that I developed as a full-time yoga teacher and entrepreneur to develop and execute a social media strategy for our campaign, to craft the message for the members interacting with press, and to represent our campaign on national and international media outlets.
And I'm Tamar. I'm the designer and the art director for Unionized Yoga. My background is in brand design and creative direction, and I've worked primarily in the entertainment industry, and I also teach design at Parsons and Pratt. In the campaign for Unionized Yoga, Markella and I used our skill sets and the resources we had, but we also added training where we needed to learn. That said, you don't need to be a graphic designer or a communications expert to do this kind of work. And our goal with this presentation is to show you how we ran a comprehensive campaign and how you can too. Our organizing strategy had to account for a highly isolated workforce with little interpersonal connection. This might seem surprising, but yoga teachers work alone most of the time. It's just a teacher and their students. Colleagues rarely encounter each other or even form personal relationships. Yoga teaching is an oversaturated field because many yoga businesses stay afloat by training new teachers and causing an oversupply of labor. This creates a fiercely competitive culture where teachers are evaluated and paid based on the number of students in their classes. Due to the oversaturation in the market, wages have been declining for newer teachers and stagnating for more experienced teachers. In this top-down culture, the employer deflects attention from exploitive business practices by making it teachers' responsibility to draw large numbers of students. Our campaign spent about 8 months organizing before we went public, and about 2 months campaigning on social media leading up to the union election. We saw an interesting parallel to the classic organizing principle of 80% listening and 20% talking. Our campaign was about 80% of the time underground and only 20% of the time in the public eye. Before we even thought about organizing and unionizing, we started organizing informally with what we then called the Teachers Initiative. We organized informally to improve working conditions and sought transparency around pay, job security, benefits, scheduling, and policy. We were met with a lot of resistance and limited outcomes from our management. We encountered the reality that our lack of bargaining rights and union protections gave us very little power to create meaningful change. But a great result of that pre-organizing time was the friendships and trust that were built in our community of teachers. Our organizing work emphasized the transformational over the transactional. We didn't talk about cards or dues until we established common ground about shared concerns in the yoga industry. Our internal organizing began in January 2019, but card signing only started in June, when about 80% of the workers had been engaged in conversation. In May, we began working with the Machinists Union, and we spent the first 4 weeks in training. We were pretty busy. We learned about organizing strategy. We wrote a mission statement. We wrote messaging. We built press contacts. We designed content for social media. We reached out to politicians. All of this in addition to the worker-to-worker conversations, which were ongoing and acted as a form of assessment. Our team of organizers and supporters quickly grew. Thanks to the first round of assessments, we achieved a majority of card signers in 5 weeks and 65% in 9 weeks. Our team had 3 main roles and perspectives. Organizing strategy. Our machinist organizer, David, taught us how to think about messaging as a way to neutralize the employer and to harness public support. Markella, the expert on social media strategy, led the way in creating engagement and deep conversations on social media. She did most of the writing and dialogue with the community. Brand design and strategy was my role, to think about the visual face of the brand with consistency, integrity, and humor. It's important to note that organizing strategy and social media strategy don't always share the same goals. Our organizing strategy always took priority over what might work on social media, because our goal was to build a coalition and not just get the most engagement. Though our social media organizing was professional, it was also pretty scrappy. Sometimes it looked like this. 2 organizers on a train platform in Westchester, in between meetings, writing, designing, posting, and fielding comments while waiting for the train back to New York City on the wrong platform.
As Tamar just mentioned, our social media presence complemented our organizing work, but didn't replace it. And part of how we did that is by focusing our attention on our comments and shares over just likes and engagement. A lot of our posts prompted inquiry and initiated conversation. We found that the true magic of a post was not necessarily in the caption, but in the comment section. And the caption merely served as the inspiration to get the dialogue going. Our social media strategy spoke to multiple audiences. The main ones were our fellow teachers at our company, our students, the employer, the industry at large, and other labor folks we picked up along the way who were interested in what we're doing. The content that spoke both to internal and external support was generally the most effective, and each platform reached some of those audiences better than others. We found that Instagram was the most conducive to storytelling and to curating which aspect of our message was the most important. Yoga teachers are generally a pretty visual group of workers and already spend a lot of time on Instagram to promote their offerings. Twitter largely drew labor folks. Case in point, that's how we met Ilana in Organizing 2.0. And Facebook drew the most support from friends, family, and some of the yoga community. Cross-platforming and sharing the support coming in with every audience group was only one way that we accomplished something that we did a whole lot of: amplify. So for this next section of the presentation, we'll go into the specific buckets we use to organize our posts and reach different audiences. We consistently amplified and highlighted support we'd coordinated with recognizable politicians and media. The day we went public, for example, the New York Times reached out to our employer, asking them if they would voluntarily recognize our union. A couple days later, our story came out in New York Magazine. Within a week, we had caught the attention of Bernie Sanders, waited in line for hours and gained the support of Elizabeth Warren, chased down Chuck Schumer at the Labor Day parade, and of course, posted about all of this. We also amplified support from well-known teachers and leaders in the yoga community by responding to all of our comments and by posting supportive comments and stories and then using them in themselves for future posts. All of this created a narrative of us and our partners working together towards solving a common problem, and it helped our supporters see themselves reflected and invested in our effort. With so much support and positivity behind what we were doing, it also made it harder for us to be trolled. We did occasionally get comments like this one, ones that wondered what the hell yoga teachers possibly have to complain about, but they were relatively rare. See, there's a big discrepancy between the perception of what a yoga teacher's life looks like and the reality. And we've really used comments like this to inspire future posts to educate the general public about that. Which leads me to our second bucket, humanize. We created a series of posts called Teacher Features. For each teacher that participated, they wrote their own caption that gave insight into their unique experience, perspective, and the reasons why they supported this effort. In this case, Jody on the left is a well-known teacher in our community. Her photo is a bit more typical of what you might see a yoga teacher posting on social media, but that also just means it's more recognizable. And her caption stands in contrast to this photo and goes into, as the title indicates, how unsustainable the profession really is. Gabby on the right wrote a really raw, powerful post about her own struggles with depression and disordered eating. Combined with an unpolished photo, her teacher feature really brought our audience straight to the heart of who this campaign is for. Humanizing our effort was also a show of strength. Much like a Vote Yes petition would be, except unlike a Vote Yes petition, we had a relatively small percentage of our group participate, but because it was all online and so personal, it actually had a really big impact. Connect. We used all possible connections between our profession and unionizing. Yoga practice and social justice are actually very complementary to one another, and we made a point of highlighting that connection a lot. We also shone a light on the irony between what yoga teachers help other people do, like self-care and community care, and what our job actually looks like. The fact is that many yoga teachers are living on the poverty line, but no one would really know that. Connecting over shared values worked because it won over the people in our audience who cared a lot about yoga and yoga teachers, but maybe not have otherwise cared so much about organizing. Our Connect post gained a lot of interest from industry-specific media and industry leaders. An underlying theme in connecting over shared values was this idea of fostering collaboration over competition and solidarity over rugged individualism. There's a lot of pressure to make it on your own as a yoga teacher, and because no one is really talking openly about the issues, it can easily seem like if you're not able to make ends meet, the problem must be you. And in fact, the individual is not the problem. The problem lies within the system, in a spirit of competition, mistrust, and internalized misogyny in a field dominated by largely female-identifying workers. The word yoga itself means union, and that was something that spoke to industry folks as well as the general public. Relate. Our fourth bucket focused on underlying industry-wide issues. We made a 1-minute video of several well-respected and successful teachers giving a first-person account of the issues they face. How there's no support for teachers, how hard it is to actually make a living, how teachers have had no voice in their own profession until now.
I feel like nobody really has my back, and I think a union would make me feel more seen, more heard, and I would feel like somebody was going up to bat for me.
By focusing on the issues, we won the support of people who might not have otherwise cared much about yoga or yoga teachers, but who were able to relate to the basic human and worker rights issues that we raised. The broader public media seem very interested in helping us get this point across. Focusing on the issues is what enabled us to ultimately be able to third-party the employer. Our inoculation posts often took on a funny or cheeky attitude. We used humor to diffuse the conflict or fear that the company's tactics might otherwise have had on our teachers. Based on the language the employer began using when speaking to teachers, it became quite clear that they were paying attention to our message and that our efforts were making a difference. Our inoculation posts were often an immediate response to what the company was doing. And because yoga teachers can be kind of a conflict-averse bunch of people, we tried to empower them by giving them language for specific situations. So back to that whole third-partying the employer thing, we rarely use the employer's name unless it was to reclaim it for ourselves. Partially because our effort wasn't just about our employer. It was about affecting industry-wide change. And talking only about our employer was A, too narrow a scope, and B, could have even come off as petty with our specific audience. And really, the bigger issues lay within the fact that this company is owned by a private equity firm, and the issues lay within the industry itself. Because we spoke to so many shared values and shared issues, when the employer initially did come out against the union, they ended up positioning themselves as coming out against the issues that we all were working together to try and address. They came off not only as anti-union, but they came off as anti-transparency, anti-sustainability, anti-equity, anti-all of the needs of our community. And so it forced them to run a much more subdued anti-campaign as a result. We started creating content weeks before we had a set date to go public. We came out swinging, and from then on steadily ramped up our presence to show our strength and power. On the low end, we posted a minimum of 3 times a week until our election, and at the height of our campaign, we were posting twice daily. We kept a backlog of content for future use and therefore also had the ability to roll things out strategically as part of a larger narrative rather than always scrambling to figure out what the hell to post. The 2 months prior to going public, we prepared for several potential different outcomes and variables. And while the employer didn't find out about our organizing effort and we had the luxury of coming out to the public on our own, we were pretty prepared either way.
When you establish a brand voice, it's a bit like creating a personality for your brand. The brand becomes a person that your audience enjoys interacting and having a relationship with. The most important thing about this kind of relationship is integrity. Everything that you do or say as a brand should be authentic, because if you're inauthentic, you'll lose trust and you'll lose engagement. A way to build trust is through consistency, a consistent presence and a consistent look, style, and tone. Once you establish that authentic, consistent presence, you just need to stick to it. For Unionized Yoga, our tone was just like it was in one-on-one conversations. It was real, it was personal, it was friendly, and it asked thought-provoking questions. It was well edited, thanks Markella. It was funny, and it created an ongoing dialogue with our audience. Visually, we stuck to 2 main colors, blue and green. For fonts, we chose 2 and used them in black and white only. Sometimes we threw in some emojis to keep things kind of light and expressive. This created a very recognizable look for us that stood out among the typical yoga Instagram accounts that look very beige, wispy, and soft. Our look made a strong statement. It was clean, it was bright, and informational. When we had something to celebrate, we'd add a pop of unexpected color like hot pink or orange as a visual exclamation point. It was also important to us to educate through our visuals. A lot of questions came to us from our fellow teachers about how the unionization process worked. So we created a visual shorthand for that. Vote, vote, bargain, vote. That's the image you see here on the left. We used this image repeatedly in our newsletters, postcards, as well as in our social media. While the employer obfuscated, misinformed, and tried to make unionization seem really complicated, our role was to make the information clear and relatable. In this teacher feature post, Brendan wrote, "Ironically, the first 2 years of teaching yoga were some of the most stressful of my life." These teacher features, while humanizing our efforts and bringing up the real issues yoga teachers face, were also an assessment. A teacher's willingness to appear publicly supportive of the union helped us to assess their level of support, push back against the employer's union-busting efforts, and create dialogue in the comments, which would then lead to more engagement. We made a chart to show you how this works. The ability to assess a worker's support through participation in social media content created more content for social media, which then gave us visibility, outside support, and cover, which in turn created more internal support and more external support. We did a similar circular loop with these postcards we designed. We spent several afternoons writing and decorating custom postcards for each teacher. When a teacher received the postcard in the mail, they texted us to let us know, and they sent a photo of themselves holding the card. These photos also acted as assessments, created content for social media, and in turn created more enthusiasm for the campaign. Another thing that we strongly recommend is varying up the content in your feed so that it stays dynamic and interesting. So here's some examples. We used audio clips from podcasts, a famous cat meme encouraging folks to vote, kids acting out a skit about Weingarten rights, GIFs, and a time-lapse video to show a really long meeting. The Instagram algorithm strongly favors video, so these posts got a lot of views, laughs, shares, and dialogue. So to recap, we strategize, amplify, humanize, connect, relate, inoculate, and repeat. And in the process, don't forget to have fun. So we'd love to hear your questions, and you can put them in the chat box.
It looks like there's already a few here.
Yeah.
All right, so let's see. Did you face any union busting? If so, was it the traditional union busting playbook, or did they tailor it to your workforce a bit more? Well, find the New York Times article that came out within like the first couple days, and that kind of goes into detail of like some of the initial ways that the company came out against the union. But because we did a lot of the tactics that we showed here, and we sort of came out very positive, very strong, and we ended up, as we said, sort of third partying the employer, we ended up putting them in a position where they had to run a much more subdued campaign. Let's see. How did you persuade potential members that a union was possible? How did you define the bargaining unit? Okay. How did we persuade potential union members that, or potential members that the union was possible? So As Tamar mentioned at some point in our presentation, we did, sort of organizing. So even before we were thinking about potentially forming a union, we had started working together unofficially. We knew about our rights for concerted activity. And during that pre-organizing period, we kind of banded together unofficially, held several meetings with management that we called them to, had already started talking about the issues. And so at some point when like nothing was really happening and it became clear that we would need to form a union to actually make actual change, that was kind of what persuaded people, I think, more than something that, Tamar or I did. And the bargaining unit, our bargaining unit ended up being teachers at the 4 locations in New York City of this particular employer. All the full-time teachers on the schedule and many of the substitute teachers as well. T, welcome back. Were all yoga teachers at the company already employees, or was it a mix of employees and independent contractors? What organizing advice could you give to yoga teachers who work as independent contractors? Tamar, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. So at our company, YogaWorks, all of the employees and all of the work was done under W-2s, and we're considered employees, and that's why we could unionize. But it's very common that yoga teachers are independent contractors. We work with a really amazing union, the Machinists Union, which we collaborated with because we had heard that they are really good at organizing non-traditional workplaces and the gig economy. So they've done things like organize the Drivers Guild in New York, organize a lobster men co-op in Maine, things like that. So in places where people can't organize under the NLRB laws, there's still other ways to organize under guilds, co-ops, and so on. And so I encourage anybody who's thinking about that and wondering about that to contact the Machinists, because they're great.
Cool, thanks. What were the steps in the process again? I'll let you take that and I'll go find the slide for that.
Okay. So the steps in the process of unionizing, that little graphic?
That's how I think the vote thing.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, when we were talking to our fellow teachers, a lot of them had not had experience with unions, didn't know much about how that process worked. And so we wanted to explain it really clearly. And so everybody knew that there was going to be, you fill out a union card, and then if there's a majority of cards, then you can file for an election, and then you vote in the election. But what people couldn't remember was what happened after that first election. And they kept asking, like, what would happen, and if they were 100% committed to being in the union after the first election. So we wanted to make it clear that there were all these kind of checks and balances along the way. So this is what we were trying to explain in this graphic, is the first vote is in favor of forming a union. And then the next vote would be to form a bargaining committee. So choosing members from within the bargaining unit to represent the bargaining unit and to represent all of its diversity. And then once that happened, then there's bargaining. And that should probably take up a really big square, because that takes up a really long time. But bargaining with the company, negotiating, we learned, can take up to a year or more. And then after that bargaining is over and a contract is reached, the whole bargaining unit then votes whether they approve that contract. So that's the beautiful thing about this process, is you're not committed to anything until that final vote, and there's no union dues or any financial ramifications until that final vote.
Thanks, Tamar. Jason Smith asks, do states require certifications? I'm in Florida. And are you aware of any grants that pay for nonprofits to train yoga? States do not require certifications. And I'm sure there are grants that help with that, but I don't know of any specifically offhand. I don't know if you do, Tamar.
Um, I'm not sure if the question is to train people to teach yoga. Is that the intention? There are nonprofits for that especially focus on like, marginalized communities because teacher trainings are very expensive. So one I'm thinking of off the top of my head is one run by Nicole Cardoza. I can't remember the name of it. Do you remember, Markella, what her nonprofit is called?
Yoga Foster?
I can. Oh, Yoga Foster. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of nonprofits like that.
Someone further up in the chat actually was like, before we started, was also posting about a nonprofit that I think trains people too. So that might be another one to look at. How did you get in touch with the yoga teachers initially? And how many yoga teachers are working for the company? So the company is actually a national company. So I have no idea actually how many teachers work nationally. Our group of teachers here in New York was roughly 120. And as far as getting in touch with them initially, obviously you don't want to use any kind of company platforms or emails or anything like that to reach people. And because we had done this organizing, we had already started building our own contact list, just like kind of grassroots networking. So talking to one person, getting them on the phone, going for coffee, and then that person maybe knew 5 other people that might be interested, and sort of we reached people really organically. Also just like DMing them on Instagram and being like, hey, kind of stranger, let's chat. I usually would ask people, I usually would say like, I have something I would love to run by you, and make them feel like you want their opinion, which you do. Great presentation. Thanks, Ian. I'm interested in if you had a goal in terms of membership from the get-go, and did you achieve that goal prior to the ballot? Do you want to answer that, Tamar?
I'm not sure I understand the question, actually.
I think it means what I'm reading is how many people were we sort of aiming to get to be supportive before we went for an election. Is that correct,
okay.
Ian? If you're still here.
Well,
so
I can respond to that.
Cool.
We had 120 people in this potential bargaining unit. It was 4 yoga studios that were spread out, 3 in New York City and 1 in Westchester. And our goal was always to get to something like 75 or 80% of support before filing for an election, just knowing that, people's minds can change. And also the yoga profession is very transient, like people come and go and join the company and leave very often. So we wanted to make sure it was a very strong percentage.
Is the ownership of the company by a hedge fund, private equity firm, in this case, an unusual status for a yoga school or institution? I have no idea. Do you?
I think it is.
Okay.
I think it is. I think the other big chains of yoga in the United States are privately owned. And so was YogaWorks until it was sold to a hedge fund and then a private equity fund. And, that's a question that we've always wondered and wish we could ask the private equity fund is like, why did you buy a yoga chain?
Yoga's so now. Is this kind of unionizing effort possible at a smaller studio or school? Well, in order to technically form a union under the NLRB, you would need to be employees, and most yoga teachers aren't employed as employees. They're employed as independent contractors. So they might not technically be able to form a union at a smaller studio or school. But as Tamar said, there are many other ways that people can still come together. And at a smaller studio or school, having conversations with like the management and ownership might actually go differently than it did with us too. So I think there are ways to come together for sure. Do the hedge fund schools get grants? I have no idea. I think this campaign could be adapted to massage workers. Rick, would love to hear more in the comments if you're still here about massage workers. And in particular, I'm curious, like, what issues do you see that there's overlap in? Can you post the link to the New York Times article that talks about the response from the company? Sure thing. There it is. Like magic. David DeMaria just posted it. Rick says cooperatives. I think some unions are supportive of cooperatives. Yeah, that's a great way to come together too, for sure. And as Tamar mentioned, the Machinist Union has helped people form cooperatives as well. Ines, if I'm hopefully saying your name correctly, what's your next step? How do you grow unionized yoga after YogaWorks? The main employer closes studios in NYC. You want to take this one?
Sure. I think one sort of misconception that there is that once a studio closes, the union is immediately gone, and that's not true. We have a really strong and perhaps prolonged bargaining process to bargain over the closure. So that's still going on, and Unionized Yoga and the Machinists are still collaborating on supporting all of these employees, even though YogaWorks announced that they would close all of the studios as of tomorrow. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, if you remember that slide with the hugging meerkats, that's, you know, that's kind of still, that's how our community feels about each other, I think, for the most part. And so a yoga brand going away is not going to dissolve our community. We're just going to shape shift into another form, and that form might be a co-op or a guild or both. But I think what this effort created that is so amazing for all of us is a sense of solidarity and collaboration, because like I was talking about before, our profession has been always very isolated, and Markella was talking about the rugged individualism, and I think it's really been a relief for people to realize that they don't have to be alone in this struggle, and that we can work together to reimagine our profession. So it's really as open and as creative as our imagination allows. That's what I believe.
Word. Massage workers. I know there are big changes such as Elements Massage. I'm not familiar with them. That are multi-state and they're not highly paid but overworked. I would be really curious to talk to people from Elements Massage if any if any of them are here, or they could reach out at Unionized Yoga or with the Machinists specifically. Part of that large gig economy in the arts and cultural industries. Francis says, since most classes are taught online now, and might be for a while, what can a union do to protect workers in this new teaching medium? I assume you mean because of the pandemic and being taught online? Is that okay? Well, so our union is in transition, right? So we're figuring out, do you want to speak more to that more specifically, actually, Tamar, of like how that's helping?
Well, it's certainly, I mean, like I was mentioning before, it's protecting the workers at this moment in time and like brainstorming ideas that the workers can come together after YogaWorks is closed and the bargaining over the closure is finished. So there's certainly like brainstorming going on around how we want to imagine and to continue. But specifically for online, maybe you can speak to it more, Markella. I think one of the issues for yoga teachers to consider is, ownership over their work. And maybe you can talk more about that.
Yeah, I mean, people have been teaching online in various forms for a while now, but you're correct that, since the pandemic sort of, came upon us, there's a whole lot more of that happening. No one can teach in person. And so everyone's trying to figure out how to be online. And in that, and in sort of trying to survive while sort of being thrown a curveball, it seems like what's not being considered very carefully as part of the overall conversation is like intellectual property rights for those classes. So I've had conversations with teachers whose studios are hosting the classes and the studio is going to maintain the rights to that class, which is like super shady. And in general, like not really, I think there's an opportunity to kind of take a step back and think about what are all these, how are we going to go about online classes? What are we going to do about the fact that most of them are being offered for free? And that's continuing, while I think it's well-intentioned, it continues to devalue a teacher's role and the practice in and of itself. When it's already devalued, because here we are, there's a reason why we formed a union, you know? So I'm concerned about what that looks like moving on through and past the pandemic. So there's a few different ways that I can think of that a union and having union rights and bargaining rights could absolutely help teachers get better contracts for online classes, maintain the rights to their intellectual property, get paid accordingly, right? So an online class isn't, clearly I haven't thought about this at all. An online class isn't, you know, you're not stuck in this little room that only fits 30 people or whatever. And so if there's like 100 people taking your class online, a teacher should be compensated more fairly for that, for the fact that it could be replayed over and over again, or the fact that the potential revenue from the studio side stands to be actually much higher if they're charging.
I want to add something also just for people to think about. I've been thinking about this, that yoga teachers are a bit like actors in that sense, that our image is used and our image has value in kind of promoting our efforts. So if somebody uses my picture and my name and my reputation, it might bring a certain amount of people. And so it's kind of similar to actors, not the same star quality, but there is a similarity. But the difference is that yoga teachers also create their own content, whereas actors are often, you know, speaking the lines of someone else who wrote it. So yeah, I think it's just interesting to think about the use of the image and the likeness, and then the intellectual property, like Markella mentioned. It's kind of a double package that you get with a yoga teacher.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Any other questions? You're welcome to reach out to us. Our handles and emails are up on the screen, and you can always reach out to Unionize Yoga as well. So if you think about anything else after our presentation, feel free to reach out and let us know.
There is a question here about intellectual property of online teachers, and I wonder if maybe David, who's in the audience, could speak to that. Yeah. David's our organizer at the Machinists and used to work at SAG-AFTRA. And so like I've seen a lot of situations now where actors are teaching courses online, or you know, people are teaching various courses online because it has this potential reach to so many people. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if there are kind of standard contracts for that, there must be in the entertainment industry.
Haven't heard about online teachers' contracts. Yeah, I don't know. Thanks, Milos. Cool. So we wrap it up?
Sure.
All right. Let's see. Cool. Well, that's all. Thanks so much for your questions and for watching our presentation. We really appreciate you being here and sharing what we've put our heart and soul into for the last year. So yeah, appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. Oh, that's nice. I'm going to stay here and watch the comments a little longer.
Yeah, it's really sweet.
That's nice. Cool. All right, T, nice job.
You too. Thank you.
Talk to you on the other side.